Okay, well today we're doing some live Q&A.
Oh, good.
Per usual. So if you guys have questions.
We had a great live Q&A last time. You guys should go back and listen to last week's. I was just thinking about, we had some pretty cool stuff happen last week in the live, I think.
We were talking about the prophetic and prophets, which is kind of the name of the game. It's the season, right?
To be jolly.
To talk about the prophetic and prophets, because we have School of the Prophets.
Yeah, School of Prophets coming up in August. That's powerful. Yeah. That's filling up quick.
And I just can't wait for the next Cultural Catalyst episodes to come out, because we had some great conversations on the topic.
We did.
So it's a good time around here.
Yeah, the gal who is part of the Chosen, the script and writer,
a producer.
Producer, yeah. She was amazing.
Yeah.
That'll be coming out soon. We'll be showing that one. That we did. We did it. We pre-recorded it. It's going to be powerful. She was so funny too.
So good. Awesome. Okay, well today I have some questions that people have already sent in.
Okay.
If you have questions, leave them in the comments.
We'll do our best.
As usual, we'll do our best. Amazing. Okay, well, lots of questions around the prophetic experiences, all that kind of thing again. First question for you today is tips for stewarding the promise well when the wait has gotten longer than expected.
It seemed like we've answered that. Like we get that question so often,
You know, it's because you preach about it.
I know.
It's like your main message.
It is. And it's maybe the hardest part of
I think it's
because prophetic culture.
Well, and I think it resonates with everybody, because regardless if you feel like you have a prophetic call or not, you probably feel like you have a call, or you've been promised something, or you have this destiny that you're waiting to see in the fullness of itself. And so you kind of do everyone sits in that waiting process in some way in their life.
Yeah, and I think that the push or the tension is, are you waiting on the Lord's timing, or is He waiting on your preparation? I think these are two really huge questions that need to be answered, because like if the Lord's like, hey, in 2025 of May of 2025, I'm going to answer this thing for you. You're like, all right, well, it's kind of like the sovereignty of the Lord has spoken, and the timing of the Lord. On the other hand, if the Lord's like, well, I'm waiting for you to actually grow your capacity or train your develop your skill, or whatever, and like we're back here waiting for the sense of prominence in sovereignty.
Yeah, you're waiting for the doors to open.
Yeah, and like there's nothing I can do, and yet even in those times, the continual knocking, the continual asking, the continual seeking is part of one of the metaphors Jesus used for the will of God. Like He's like, God's got a will for you, but you got to knock, you got to keep knocking, you got to keep seeking, you got to keep you got to keep pursuing. And so I think that the one thing, I think there is a tension between being content and pressing in.
That is very good.
I said that was profound. I just said that, didn't I?
You just said it. Yeah, you just said there's a difference between being content. Oh, say it again.
No, I said there's a tension between being content and actually
and pressing in.
Being persistent. And I think we want in our spirit, we want gratitude we want to live in gratitude and be thankful for what we have. We want to be content. And we want to know that when I get that thing, it's not going to make me happier.
Right.
And I think that's a big deal. It's like when I get that house, when I get that girlfriend, when I get that boyfriend, when we have children, when I get married. And those things are all wonderful and beautiful in their time, but also sometimes it keeps us from experiencing the fullness of life right now, because we're like, well, that event is going to make me happy, but happiness is an inside job. And so, I'm deceived into thinking I have to have that thing to fulfill my life. And, in some cases where I'm sick, like, oh man, I want God to heal me. There are things like that, but there's just a lot of times when we just have it in our heart that when that thing happens, then it's going to change my life. And God's like, no, I'm here right now. You have full access to me.
That is so good. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I feel something on that. Because I think there's also the tension of, we're always told like, oh, just be thankful for the season that you're in. Just be present where you're at. And the reality is sometimes we're actually in really hard seasons and we're not actually experiencing the fullness of what God has for us.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a level of, okay, maybe this is actually a moment where I get to press in and I get to find hope for my future.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be fully content with where I'm at right now.
Yeah, not fully content in
like
knowing,
the circumstances.
In my circumstances, because I know that I have lacked in some way because of my effort or, I haven't sought the Lord like I should have or something, you know. So there's that. I need to press in. I shouldn't be content in my mediocre lifestyle.
Yes, yeah.
But on the other side is we should stay in a place of gratitude, because no matter where you're at, there's always something, a lot to be thankful for, especially if you know the Lord, right?
Yeah, so good. Okay, someone's asked this question live. They said, what materials or training do you have or recommend for apostles and prophets working together to see greater kingdom impact? It's a great question.
Man, that's a great book that needs to be written. I mean, honestly, like I think that I have attempted to write a book on at least 3 occasions that I can think of, talking about not the emerging of the fivefold ministry, but the merging. Like, how do apostles and prophets
merge?
Evangelists, pastors, teachers, like, how do they actually work together?
Yeah.
Like, if you said, well, these are kind of job description roles, or they're, what is their level of authority? What if the apostle is, is 20, and let's say the pastor is a 50-year-old, well-seasoned spiritual woman or man? Like, who is actually leading? Is the apostle leading because the apostle Paul said, first apostles, then prophets? Or, so these are questions that they seem simple on a philosophical or theological side, but because we've seen so many train wrecks, right, on how people are trying to walk out the theology of the fivefold ministry, but actually all of us, but we still don't have the best model to see how that should work. So I think those are great questions, and I think there needs to be a great book written about it. I wrote a little bit about it in the book Heavy Rain, which I think is, I actually think Heavy Rain is my best book. As far as it's the book it captures my interest the most, but and it has some aspects of the fivefold ministry working together, especially apostles and prophets. Yeah. But I wouldn't say I wouldn't count it the textbook on how
to merge.
Yeah, how especially apostles and prophets work together. Yeah. So no, I don't know of a book like that. If somebody knows of a great book, you can put it in the chat there.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Great question. Okay. Somebody has asked, how is the best way to develop your prophetic ministry when you don't have a church where you can develop your gifts?
Well,
it's a tricky one.
I don't think that's so tricky. You know why?
Why?
There are so many places to get training. Like, we're doing the School of the Prophets. There's one place, but I know Stacey Campbell's doing a School of the Prophets. I mean, she's amazing. I totally trust her. There are all these schools of the Spirit, and honestly, even if you're accepted as, or even if your church is super spiritual, and accepts the prophetic ministry, how often do you go to church? Like, let's say 2 hours in the morning, Sunday morning, and 2 hours Wednesday night. I mean, it's not like we're not actually doing life inside the organization of the church.
Yep. So
most all ministry in the early church wasn't done in the synagogues. So, I think it's great to take a course, read books. We have great books. I would recommend reading Basic Training for the Prophetic Ministry. Daniel's got a book about prophetic activation, Daniel McCollum. there are so many good books right now on prophetic ministry, not just ours, other people's.
Yeah.
That there really is no, I mean, if you're really hungry on that subject to learn,
there's a lot of material.
There's a lot of material. And you can join our SQ Institute. You can join Lindsay's, what's Lindsay's called? Aqua
Regia.
Regia. And so, yeah, and then practice outside the walls of the church. I mean, beautiful, actually.
That's really good. Really good. Okay, somebody has asked this question. What is the difference between soul gazing versus prophecy? Do you know what that soul gazing? Have you heard
Well, I've never heard it in that term, but I mean, I think the concept is sometimes, like for example, Jesus made this statement many times, or the four Gospels made this statement about Jesus. And knowing their thoughts, he said.
Yeah.
And knowing their thoughts, he answered them. Mm-hmm. And so I think soul gazing is a manifestation of I read your soul, and then I read it back to you as a prophecy, like
interesting.
Which is what you shouldn't do, right?
Right.
So you're sitting there and you're like, man, I hope he tells me that I'm going to get married, to Joe, and you're sitting there wanting this to happen, and instead of realizing, the prophetic person realizing that he just read your thoughts and now he's going to read it back, he's going to mirror it back to you as a prophecy, he just goes, well, the Lord says you're going to marry a guy named Joe, and then when it's all over, it never happens that way. And come to find out, you had the same experience Jesus had in knowing their thoughts. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. And then, but you didn't know, you weren't aware that you were actually reading their thoughts.
Interesting.
Am I making sense? Because you're.
So basically you're saying that you knew their thoughts, but you just counted that as prophecy versus actually capturing the thoughts of God
exactly.
towards them. You just captured their thoughts.
Exactly. And I think that's probably what they're talking about. But even if it's not, that's the most common. A very common mistake is that oftentimes, or I won't say oftentimes, sometimes prophetic people can read the minds of other people. And I'm not talking about ESP or trying to read somebody's mind or anything.
Perception, maybe?
Yeah, I'd say discernment, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I hope that's what they're talking about, because that's all I know about.
Well, that's interesting enough.
Yeah.
Somebody's asked, what do you sense God doing in this prophetic season, and how can we partner with him as the bride?
Well, it depends on what metron you're called to. We explain metron so many times, but your sphere of influence.
Yeah.
If we're talking about like the nation, I think that we are in the most profound time of shifting culture that I've ever been in the 68 years I've walked the planet. If you think about the idea of morality, which I care lots about, obviously I started Moral Revolution, so it's a passion of mine.
Yeah.
And you look at Roe versus Wade passes after 50 years, gets overturned by the Supreme Court. And then you see people, 20 years I've been sharing, and I'm definitely not alone, but one of the lone voices, I was telling people, listen, the LGBTQ movement is not going to stay private. It's not going to just be live and let live, because they are coming for your children. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about every person who identifies as gay. I'm talking about the activists. Mm-hmm. Like they want to shift culture to normalize something that's become common. Yeah. And they are very strategic, and they are going after your children. And I'm telling you, over and over for 20 years, I've said they're gonna take the school system over. They're gonna take the university system over. They are coming to indoctrinate your children. And I'm talking about just the activists now. So let's be careful. And now, and it felt like nobody's listening. Now I'm sure that's an exaggeration. Mm-hmm. And now you look around in the last 2 years, all of a sudden, non-Christian parents, people, just everyday people who don't even know God or love God, and including Christians, are they're going to their school board meetings, they're reading their kids' books for the first time. Like, you should see what's in these books. It's like they're challenging the gay flag. The pride flag is a flag about sex. It's actually about sex. It's saying we are proud of the fact that we have sex with the same sex. Like, that's what you want in your school. Like, you want them to fly the pride flag. What other flag you want them to fly? And so people are starting to understand what's going on, and they're starting to push back because we're in a season of desperation, and desperate people ultimately win. They ultimately win, and now believers and unbelievers who care about morality, care about character, care about their kids, what their kids are exposed to.
Yeah.
All of that is now it's under investigation, and you have governments going, what's going on?
Happening?
You have transgender. This has been going on for a long time, but all of a sudden, very prominent women athletes are being dethroned, losing their scholarships because transgender women who are men, biological men, are outrunning them, outplaying them.
Yeah.
And like, this has been going on forever, but not forever. This has been going on for the last 10 years, but finally some very prominent, athletes are being totally displaced. And people are going, wait a second, that's my daughter. And they're not necessarily Christians. They're just like, my daughter lost her scholarship because this guy poses as a woman and wants to run against my daughter, wants to swim against my daughter, wants to play volleyball against my daughter. Like, so I think these are really powerful times in that culture. We're in the midst of a 10-year cultural shift.
Wow.
For the first time.
I mean, that's
in 40 years.
That should feel encouraging. It should feel hopeful.
Yeah.
Because I think so often we're just told it in society, at least my whole life, is like, oh my goodness, well, is this not just the worst thing it's ever been, right? It just is like...
It gets darker and darker.
Yeah, people really question, should I even have kids, bringing them into a world like this? It's just doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And to think, oh, wait, what?
Yep, people are rising
Maybe
up.
God actually has a plan.
People are done being afraid. They're done being afraid they're going to get sued. And now you got lawsuits with kids that were transgender 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You notice them? They're all over the internet. Like, just do any search. You got these 30-year-old and women and 30-year-old men who've done transition therapy. And many of them have had mutilation with their breasts or penis cut off, and they are standing up now and going, I'm having infections constantly. I'm trying to transition back, and now they're suing their doctors, their psychologists, their psychiatrists, their schools, and this is going to be the big thing right now. You think people sued over cigarettes? Watch what happens in the next 10 years with. I mean, I would say, beware if you're on the side of teaching children or encouraging children to transition. Beware if you're on that side and you're a doctor or a nurse or a professional or a teacher or a principal, because you're going to end up in a lawsuit. There'll be class action $1 billion lawsuits. You watch. I prophesied it 30 years ago. Sorry, I got passionate. Did you see that? You touch that button, and then it goes all the way up to the top.
You took us somewhere.
Sorry, that wasn't even the question you asked, probably.
No, I don't even remember the question I asked, but here we are.
What do you feel God's speaking? That's what, yeah.
Okay, I have one more question for you today, okay? So this person's asked, what wisdom would you give someone who has a voice to speak prophetically into politics, CEOs, celebrities, etc.? What wisdom would you give them?
Well, I think that when the season's right, if you keep knocking and you keep seeking and you keep asking, and when the season's right, the door will open. So I don't mean stand outside the door like, and I don't mean that.
Just wait.
But I mean, don't also kick the door open.
Don't force your way in there.
No. Don't pick the lock.
Yeah.
Don't kick the door open. But keep knocking, looking for the invitation. Hey, I'm available, Lord. I'm open, and then keep preparing. And I'll tell you what, the Lord will open a door. Now, let me tell you, like, I know the political world pretty well. And one of the things that happens is, this is how it happened for me. I ministered to one person, and those people are a small group of people. Like, they actually even internationally know each other.
Yeah.
And if you do something profound for one of them, over a period of a very short time, you will have no time to do anything but minister to, I mean, if I wanted to just minister to politicians, I could like stop my job right now and spend the rest of my life and probably do 1 hour meetings, 8 hours a day for 6 days a week, because people in that world need so much encouragement.
Yeah.
And they need so much direction, and they all know each other. So, you know, I'd say, you know, when the Lord opens a small door for you, that door that looks small, that door is really connected to a whole bunch of other people.
It's really good.
So have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll see you guys then.
God bless you.